Thank you for that spontaneous applause. Good evening and welcome to Enough Rope. My special guest tonight has the distinction of being not only one of the world's most celebrated women, but also one of its most celebrated men. Will you please welcome Dame Edna Everidge's permanent tenant, Mr. Barry Humphries. Thank you so much for coming in. I know that you're undergoing a gruelling rehearsal schedule at the moment.
Yes, it is nerve-wracking, but the applause, the reception of the studio audience, I mean, I only wish it had been spontaneous, but it was
I told you to make it spontaneous.
Sounded a little over-rehearsed to me.
Oh, well, I do apologise.
Only I were over-rehearsed.
Barry, I've been looking at tapes of Edna, and it struck me that she has no breasts.
Well, I'm sure she has breasts, but they are recessed breasts. They're unobtrusive, and under those circumstances, it's surprising she's appealed so strongly to the Americans. Don't you think?
She's not lined up for any endorsements with Hooters, for instance?
Not mammiferous in any sense.
No.
I think I decided a long time ago, insofar as I have any control over Dame Edna, that she would not have breasts.
And why was that?
Because from time to time I have to play the part of Dame Edna, and I refuse to wear padding of that kind or have implants. And because she's better flat-chested. Her legs are her main feature.
They are magnificent legs. What is your waxing routine?
Well, it's not necessary, really, to subject oneself to the waxing treatment, because Edna wears several layers of pantyhose. I knew there'd be some very intimate disclosures on this show.
I hadn't even got to the Brazilian question yet.
We haven't travelled north to Brazil yet, no. But I always thought my own legs were very unfortunate. I was always very embarrassed about my legs.
Really?
From the early days in the theatre in Melbourne, when I played Shakespearean roles and had to wear tights. And every time I went on stage, people laughed, which was very embarrassing.
Not good for Shakespeare.
And Shakespeare, you know, and me doing Shakespeare. And there was always a bit of a titter when I went on the stage, and I knew it was my legs. So I would dodge behind furniture a great deal. I would run on stage and get straight behind a huge Jacobean table or behind a chair. And I then said to the director, he said, "Why are you moving in this strange, darting fashion on the stage?" And I said, "Well, you know, it's serious. It's a serious play. It's a tragedy." And the laughter seems a little inappropriate. And I said, "It's my legs, you see, and so I'm hiding them, and I'm just letting them have my less funny torso." And he said, "Oh, you don't realise that you are naturally ridiculous," he said to me. And that was the best theatrical advice I think I've ever received, because in a sense, I'm able to be naturally ridiculous from then on, and I was given permission to be absurd.
I don't wish to get too intimate, but I am curious to know, what would Edna be like in bed?
This is an aspect of marital life that Edna always disdained. She has 3 children, and I think she probably had to do something fairly disagreeable on about 4 occasions in order to have 3 children. Edna always felt, you see, that this aspect of life was greatly overrated.
Right.
And I'm sure if we'd met her husband, the late Norm, we might well have agreed with her. But in bed, I should think she would have been typical of the ladies of her period. And she probably would have worn gloves and a hat.
And had sex in black and white.
Yes, in black and white, or no, not in black and white. She would have had sex in pastel tones. I'm pleased that pastel tones are coming back, as is knitting.
Is it?
And in the show that opens in a week, this show of mine, this strange event
Back to my roots
that
and
I
other
dread,
suckers.
I intend to knit on stage while talking to the audience. And, well, and they invite them to knit. I'll have a lot of wool, a lot of needles.
Are you an accomplished knitter?
I used to be able to knit. I've once knitted a very convincing hot water bottle cosy and a pair of bed socks. Socks, not easy. 5 needles I needed for those socks.
God. Would it be wrong of me to assume that this was a down period in your career?
It was before I had a career. It was at a time when I really had absolutely no idea what I was going to do. And, you know, this was phrased in a rather scary way in my childhood. People would lean over you, grown-ups, and they'd say, "And what are you going to be?" Not do, be. So very early on I confused being with doing. I had friends who knew they wanted to be engine drivers or golfing pros or accountants. No one who wanted to be an artist of any kind. And I'd only sort of just then learnt what an artist was. You know, I'd read the life of Vincent van Gogh, and it didn't look too encouraging. You know? And, you know, self-mutilation in a cornfield wasn't my idea of artistic life. But what are you going to be? What are you going to do? There was a tremendous pressure on becoming something that would please one's parents. And, of course, everyone was falling back on something. I decided not to have anything to fall back on. I decided to do something that I enjoyed, and it took tremendous courage or something to tell my parents that I wanted to be briefly in the theatre. I didn't say I wanted to do it for very long. Just a weekend or something, you know.
Well, and now it's a grand career. But you're talking about this new show that you say you dread. What do you dread?
Stage fright. You know, I think a lot of people think that we are nerveless people in the theatre, that we don't feel that kind of terror which traditionally anyone who has to do any public speaking feels. It's meant to be one of the great fears, isn't it? People have nightmares about having to give speeches in public. It's worse for actors because our livelihood depends on it. You see, yours doesn't. You can make a fool of yourself if necessary. And so can I, and so I will. But it's just the terrible butterflies. You know, it is that anxiety.
But it's remarkable what you do, because when you're on stage, particularly as Edna, you bring people up on stage. Now, you are in control of your show and your script, but you're not in total control of the other person. You cannot always be in total control. Have you ever found yourself caught short or caught out?
Yes. I like it. It's very important that Edna should not win all the time, that she should make a mistake. She should be found out. She should be wrong-footed by the audience. Sometimes, of course, this can be almost a disaster. Like on the first night in New York. You can imagine how important that was to me.
Yes.
I'd done a show off-Broadway in the late 1970s, which I'd had high hopes for, which had done very well in its previews. They're the shows you do before you let the critics in. On the first night, the critics arrived, and it went very, very well, and there was a party afterwards, and everyone was celebrating. And I noticed the producer had disappeared. I went upstairs, found an office, and saw him slumped over the first edition of the New York Times, tearing his hair in despair, because the New York Times critic had absolutely hated the show. And that was it. So I thought, well, I'll go back to Broadway, but I'll wait till the critic's dead. And I had to wait 25 years. I had to wait a quarter of a century for that critic to die. I kept writing to him saying, you know, how are you feeling, you know?
Did you have the obituaries airlifted to you wherever you were?
Have you had a blood test lately, you know? And scanning the obituaries. Finally, he didn't exactly die, but he became moribund and he was fired. And I crept back.
Yes.
And I opened in a beautiful theatre on Broadway, and I felt all the signs were auspicious. Everything was looking good. And I had tried the show out in San Francisco, admittedly in the presence of an enormously gay audience. You know, I mean, an audience of unnaturally healthy men. And including the village people, I think. I expected to see them with their feathers and hard hats. And so that was good. And I went to Broadway, and this time it worked. And there was a party afterwards, and all that was magnificent, except during the performance. Edna had taken a dislike to a woman in the third row wearing sunglasses. You know, these people who wear sunglasses indoors are irritating.
Yes, it's wrong.
It's affected, isn't it? And she kept calling this woman Four Eyes and generally being pretty discourteous, audience laughing a good deal, encouraging the dame. And at the end of the show, when Edna dressed up various members of the audience that she'd taken a fancy to as members of the royal family, there was someone who was going to be Fergie. There was a man, middle-aged businessman, who was going to be the Queen Mother. There was Prince Philip, Prince Charles. This woman was summoned. She said, well, up you come, darling. Little Four Eyes is coming onto the stage. And the woman stood. And from deep inside Dame Edna, as if within the Jenolan caves, in a distant recess of this cavern that is the dame, I observed the woman reaching for a white stick. And she slowly rose to her feet and felt her way. Now, the theatre is a smallish one, and the audience could see the third row. And as this woman, this blind woman, rose, and Edna was saying, oh, you don't need to come, you don't need to come. No, no, please, sit. A silence fell on that audience, such as I have never heard in the theatre. It was palpable. It was the worst silence you can imagine. And it was the silence of failure the second time around. I knew it was over. You know, I'd blown it. Could I wait another 25 years?
Was it worth commissioning a hit?
This woman insisted. She was helped onto the stage by some bastard sitting down there. She got onto the stage, and Edna, I thought to myself, you know, when you're driving and you skid, you go into the skid. What do you do? What do you do? My mind is whirling. I think you have to tell the audience what you're thinking. So Edna said, I know what you're thinking, possums. Silence in the audience. Because they're very sensitive in America about anything that... Edna said, well, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how is Edna going to cope with this one? There was a general murmur of assent. So Edna then said, I'm thinking exactly the same thing. And the woman sort of tottered towards Edna. Cursed blind woman that she was. And she sort of fell in Edna's direction. I thought, will I catch her or will I not? I caught her. And then she was clearly giggling a bit, this woman. You know, she still had retained a pretty keen sense of humour, the malicious old bitch that she was. And I said... So I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose. I'll take the great risk. You see. And so Edna said, well, at least you didn't bring the dog. At that, the audience laughed. Thank God. It was like a sort of a sigh of relief from the audience. They thought, the audience is thinking, we don't have to go through this pain, you know. Yeah. We don't have to disapprove. And it was a great response. And after that, the woman was laughing, Edna was laughing. You know, I was crying, actually. Edna was laughing. Everything was fine. She dressed up as Fergie, a blind Fergie.
Yes. Perhaps the only saving grace.
Yes, she couldn't watch her weight very readily. But She was a weight feeler, you know.
Yeah.
and
she thinks she's lost 20 kilos.
To remember. And that's what we have to go through, you know, just to be in the cheering up business.
Yes. You've reached a point now where, as Barry, as Edna, you can say almost anything to you. You can insult your audience as much as you like.
I wish you wouldn't emphasise this insult.
No.
Empowering.
Embrace.
Empowering.
Embrace.
Embrace. Empower. Bless.
Bless. Benedict. But equally, you could insult your audience as much as you like, and they love you for it. Is that disappointing?
No. It's not, because it's the role of the comedian, you know. If I produced 1,000 angry people every night, I don't think they'd be coming back in large numbers or bringing their grandchildren, as they have now started to do. And it's not anymore, you know, my dad used to go to your shows. Oh, no. It's incredible when you live forever. It's wonderful. And I'm hoping to go on for quite a while yet. I remember when I used to go to the theatre with my mother, and we'd go to matinees of musicals. There would be old performers dragged out of retirement to appear in these shows. And my mother would sit there at the matinee, and afterwards she'd say, "Isn't it pathetic at his age that he's still doing it?" She went there with a kind of sense of schadenfreude. She really enjoyed the tragic spectacle of artistes way past their prime, struggling to do something which was beyond their scope. Rouged up, overpainted, unable to remember their lines. That's what gave my mother the greatest pleasure. I think I may have inherited this characteristic from her. Isn't it pathetic? And I'm longing to see people turning to their children and saying that in my audiences. Say, well, I remember when he was quite good, you know, he used to be funny. Used to be funny.
The joy of this is that you have a title for your last show, don't you? Isn't it pathetic at his age, starring Barry Humphries?
Yes, I actually did call a show that years ago, before I was pathetic.
You were ahead of your time.
I think in about 20 years I'll call... I mean, they'll all be dead then, and I can call it that again.
Yes,
they won't remember.
How do you create a character, Barry? Because you work harder than just about anybody I know, and you don't seem to me to mingle necessarily with a lot of the people you become on stage.
No, I certainly don't. I've been avoiding them for a very long time.
How do you know these people?
I am a member of the South Australian Gladiolus Society. That's how I learnt that gladioli are bisexual hermaphrodites. Did you know that?
No.
I don't think people would buy so many of them if they knew that. You know, when these ladies arrange them in a vase at night, they should leave the light on. But I kind of mingle, you know. I mean, I know a lot of people in different jobs, different walks of life.
But it's an extraordinary ear, Barry. Is it? Do you just pick it up by osmosis? How do you get the source material to become who you become?
Well, I like reading lots of Australian newspapers and magazines, and Australia is a rich source of humour. You just have to be the Governor-General to know that. And it's full of wonderful characters, isn't it?
We're skipping away from me here, Barry. I'm going to
no, please, pin me down,
I'm going to pin you down.
Pin me down.
I'm going to get brutal now.
No, get brutal. Move in for the kill.
All right, I'm moving out.
How many venereal infections have you really had?
I refuse to answer that question because I'm the interviewer. You are now on your fourth marriage.
Fourth marriage?
Fourth
yes,
marriage.
I suppose so, yes.
What sort of a man are you to live with? I'm guessing low maintenance.
Yes, quite low maintenance. I'm not sure what that means exactly.
Easygoing.
Fairly easygoing. I think sometimes a bit moody. not morose, not depressed, just difficult, and also a bit demanding, you know, in the sense of expecting things to be done. I think when you work in my job, and I've been touring such a long time, and so if you ask me where I live, I try to remember the name of the hotel.
Right.
I have things done for me. You know, when you're in the theatre, there's a dresser, there's a stage manager, there are people who kind of more or less at your beck and call. Not a thing wives much like. You know, they don't like to hear the fingers snap too often.
And the ring of the bell,
The ring of the bell, the stamp of the foot, the clap of the hand.
You were an alcoholic, and you got through it. You gave it up.
Oh, I don't say I was. I mean, I consider I am, in the same way as a diabetic is a diabetic.
But you haven't had a drink famously for more than 30 years, which is remarkable strength.
I don't think it's not so much strength. I mean, I think it's just a realisation that it's off the menu, you know. I mean, it doesn't concern me. I have to buy the stuff for people, but I just don't drink it myself. It's rather a relief, really, you know.
What did
Don't have to look in the newspaper and see what I did last night.
And you're safe here, let me tell you. What did that addictive nature of yours mutate into?
Oh, other forms of addiction, of course. I mean, I'm addicted to buying books, and I haunt second-hand booksellers, as you do. I find it a beautiful place for contemplation and a good way to spend money. And I like going to museums, and I like painting. I'm addicted to the smell of turpentine. I like, well, I'm not a sort of a sniffer, but and I like nice-looking people, you know, not necessarily of my own sex. And I like adrenaline very much. I'm addicted to adrenaline. I really enjoy excitement. And there is nothing quite so exciting as the voice over the address system in the dressing room saying, on stage in 5 minutes. And you hear the murmur of the audience, all wondering what's going to happen. And you're wondering too.
You said that you like people of the opposite sex. Would it be fair to describe yourself down the years as a good pants man?
Oh, it's a horrible, vulgar expression. No,
It's a great Australian expression.
No, there were other garments that I